You'll learn several ways to enter the water during this course. Depending upon your physical characteristics, one you may learn is the giant stride, which is popular when diving from large dive boats or from docks onto deep water. After your pre-dive safety check, with your buddy, go to the water entry area. To avoid walking with fins on, put on your fins there if you can. You can stabilize each other or hang on to something stable. Partially inflate your BCD. Check that the entry area is clear and confirm that your buddy's ready. Breathe from your regulator and hold it and your mask like this, so they don't get bumped out of place when you splash. You can hold your instruments and accessories with the other hand. However, some divers prefer to put it on the back of their head. Look straight ahead and take a big step into the water. Keep holding your mask and regulator until you're stable on the surface. Turn to the boat or dock, poolside in this case. Signal that you're okay and clear the area for your buddy. Boat diving, you typically wait on a line trailing from near the ladder or the stern if there's a bit of a current. You use a weight check at the surface to determine proper weighting. Starting with your estimated weight, breathe from your regulator and deflate your BCD completely. Holding a normal breath, you should float at eye level, and when you exhale, you should sink slowly. If not, add or remove weight until you do. Once you're there, if you're wearing a full cylinder, add about 2 kilograms or 5 pounds. This is because the air in your cylinder has weight, and you get lighter as you use it up. The 2 kilograms or 5 pounds offsets this weight change. Sometimes a BCD band is too loose and the cylinder starts to slip. If this happens before getting into the water, it's usually simplest to take the scuba kit off and readjust it. If a cylinder comes loose during the dive, it's not usually an emergency because it will stay with the diver. Find some sand or other insensitive bottom and have her turn face down, like this. Loosen the band enough to replace the cylinder. Then tighten and lock it. If it comes loose at the surface, you may be able to re-secure it by having the diver hold on to something while breathing from her snorkel or regulator. It's usually easiest if the diver has no more air in the BCD than necessary to float. If a cylinder slips loose while exiting the water, it is often easiest to ease back into the water, slip the kit off, and then lift it from the water like this. You'll practice taking your gear off in the water at the surface so you can do this. When your snorkel's out of your mouth at the surface, it fills with water. To clear it so you can breathe, blow forcefully like this to blast the water out. You'll hear this called the blast method. After clearing, inhale cautiously and use airway control to breathe past any residual water and blast again to get rid of it. Practice this with your face in the water, which is how you do it when you're keeping an eye on something below, or when in choppy waves that, for practical purposes, mean that your face is always in the water. You switch from your snorkel to your regulator, and your regulator to your snorkel on almost every dive. Again, practice this with your face in the water. Starting with your snorkel, take a breath, then exchange it for your regulator. Clear your regulator. After a few breaths, take a breath, go back to your snorkel, clear it, and breathe. Repeat this exchange until you can do it effortlessly. During confined water dive 2, you'll begin developing your neutral buoyancy skills. One popular technique for starting out is the fin pivot. Lie face down on insensitive bottom, sand for example, if you're not in a pool. Relax, then breathe slowly and deeply. If you're approximately neutrally buoyant, you should pivot up on your fin tips as you inhale and down as you exhale. If you don't, add a small burst to your BCD and try again. Make small changes. Adding a lot of air risks a rapid ascent. Be patient. When you pivot up and down as you breathe, like this, you're about neutral. Once you know how to do this, start using neutral buoyancy as your normal state while diving. For example, if you need to clear your mask, instead of kneeling, clear it in mid-water or with just light fin tip contact, in a more horizontal position, like this. Although the fin pivot is popular, your instructor may have you use a different technique. Confined Water Dive 2 continues your mask clearing skills. You'll start by clearing a fully flooded mask, which you do just like a partially flooded one, like this. Then, you take off your mask completely. This prepares you in case it were to get dislodged completely while diving. If you're not wearing contacts, keep your eyes open. Everything will be blurry, but you'll see well enough to swim, signal your buddy, and so on. If you find it uncomfortable to breathe with your nose exposed to water at first, block it momentarily if necessary. But with a little practice, you'll be able to breathe without a mask and without blocking it. You'll practice doing this for a minute or more, which is about how long it would take to reach the surface if you lost your mask and couldn't find it. After a minute, put it back on and clear it. Then, check the seal for trapped hair or your hood under it, which would allow an annoying drizzle until corrected. A rare but possible malfunction is for your BCD or dry suit inflator to stick open. Respond by disconnecting it and venting the excess air. To start the exercise, your instructor may simulate the sticking by holding down the inflation button. Immediately disconnect the hose from the inflator, like this. It takes more effort with your regulator pressurized. Push the hose toward the connection, like this, while pulling back on the release fitting with your fingers. If you can't disconnect quickly, get relatively vertical and hold open the exhaust, like this, so you can keep your buoyancy under control while continuing to disconnect the hose. After you're finished practicing, be sure to reconnect the inflator hose. During Confined Water Dive 3, you'll learn to inflate your BCD without low-pressure inflation from your cylinder. You're better able to respond appropriately if you know what it feels like to run out of air. Your instructor will simulate this by closing your cylinder valve while you breathe and watch your SPG. Note that the pressure drops with each breath, and you'll feel breathing become noticeably difficult. When you can't get a breath, signal out of air, and your instructor will reopen your valve. You'll see your SPG return to its previous reading, and you can resume breathing. Good divers know their approximate remaining air at all times. To help you develop this ability, at times your instructor will, without prior notice, ask you to signal your air pressure without rechecking your SPG, after which you'll check together. If you're managing your air supply and monitoring your SPG as you should be within 20 bar or 300 psi. One of the exits you may learn is the ladder exit. This is a common technique when diving from larger boats. Surface near but not too close to the ladder area. If there's another diver ahead of you, don't get right under her. The diver could fall back in, or her cylinder could slip loose. If there's a current, you usually have a line to hang on to until it's your turn. When it is, approach the ladder and grab it firmly. Keep your mask on so you can see above and below the surface, and switch back to your regulator so you can breathe if you were to fall back in. Then, while keeping contact with the ladder, hand up any accessories, then remove and hand up your fins. Some divers slip adjustable fins onto their wrists, like this, so they have them to swim with if they lose their grip and get pushed away by the current. Breathe from your regulator until you're all the way aboard, and immediately take a seat and have a buddy help you get your gear off. Depending upon the boat, the ladder, surface conditions, and your physical characteristics, you may hand up your weights or your entire scuba kit before climbing the ladder. Some divers can't climb ladders at all and use different exit techniques.
One thing that makes diving popular is that you can enjoy it in so many different environments, each with characteristics that make it special. Besides coral reefs and temperate ocean, diving's popular in lakes, reservoirs, springs, flooded quarries, rivers, and human-made dive sites. In all of them, 6 environmental conditions affect you as a diver, though how and the extent depend on the environment. In most environments, temperature varies seasonally, but water also tends to form temperature layers, getting colder as you go deeper. The depth at which you find colder water depends on the environment, season, and water motion. What's important is to wear exposure protection based on your planned depth. Visibility can range from just a meter or a few feet to more than 30 meters or 100 feet. It's usually defined as how far you can recognize a diver horizontally. Like a dust storm in air, lots of particles in the water reduce the visibility. Water movement, weather, plankton, and the bottom composition can all contribute to suspended particles and lower visibility. Lower visibility doesn't necessarily mean a poor dive. What you see is more important than how far. But lower visibility can make it harder to stay with buddies, so stay close, take your time, and watch each other. Navigation usually requires more attention, and it's easier to get disoriented while descending and ascending. As you've learned, it's easiest to descend and ascend along the bottom or a line, and this is especially true in lower visibility. But you can use your dive computer to watch your depth if you don't have a reference. If the visibility is so poor that you wouldn't have fun, it's usually best to not make the dive or end it if you've already started. Clear water can cause disorientation too. Again, a reference helps. You can also get too far from your buddy even though you can see each other. Remember to stay close. The 2 types of water movement that affect you as a diver are waves and current. We'll look at how waves affect diving later in this section. Currents affect diving because you can't swim against any but a very weak one. So you need to use the appropriate techniques. Because they're often strongest at the surface and weakest near the bottom, plan a dive in a current so you avoid long surface swims. Begin your dive swimming into a mild current. That way, when you turn the dive, the current helps carry you toward your exit point rather than pushing you away from it. Especially on the surface, don't swim against anything but a very weak current. Doing so can exhaust you. Swim across the current to reach shore, to reach a line trailed behind the dive boat for this purpose, or to get out of the current, depending upon the situation. When boat diving, if you can't get to the boat due to a current, remain calm, stay with your buddy, inflate your BCD, and use your signaling devices to get the boat to pick you up. Drift diving helps you deal with currents by letting you float with them. It's an exhilarating way to dive that's popular where strong oceanic currents prevail. You can learn the techniques in the PADI Drift Diver course. The bottom composition may be silt or mud, sand, rock, coral, or vegetation, with more than one common at most dive sites. Regardless of type, avoid bottom contact as much as possible so you don't stir it up and reduce the visibility, to help avoid cuts and stings, and so you don't damage aquatic life. Stay neutrally buoyant with your gear streamlined well above the bottom. If you must contact the bottom, choose a place without sensitive aquatic life and hazards, and settle onto it gently, ideally with little more than fin-tip contact. When you're close to the bottom, watch where you put your hands and feet. When wading in or out during a shore dive, some bottom contact is unavoidable. If necessary where you're diving, Wear wetsuit boots to reduce the risk of cuts from rocks or stings from stepping on aquatic life. Wade just deep enough to start swimming. Sunlight affects how much light you have underwater, but it can also cause sunburn, perhaps the most common injury divers get. But it's easy to avoid. Use sunscreen and stay in the shade when you can. Cover up with clothing and remember that you can still burn when it's overcast. Repeated long-term exposure to bright sunlight can damage your eyes, so protect them with good quality sunglasses. There's great diving in both freshwater and saltwater. Your skills apply to both, but a few differences generally apply. Freshwater is less dense and you don't need as much weight, so check proper weighting when going from salt to freshwater or vice versa. Marine environments tend to have more aquatic life and more water motion, waves, currents, and tides. Freshwater environments are more likely to have bottoms that stir up easily and have distinct cold water layers as you go deeper within the recreational depth range. As a diver, you develop the ability to assess dive conditions. You learn to do this from your instructor, other divers, and experience, so that you can assess dive conditions based on the weather, season, water motion, how the water looks, reports online or from other divers, and dives you've made at similar sites. Your assessment includes deciding whether or not to dive. If you have a concern, get more information about how to handle it if you can. If you can't address the issue, then go elsewhere or dive another day. Remember that ultimately, you decide to dive. You are responsible for your own safety, so only you can make the final decision to dive. As discussed in Section 1, an environmental orientation helps you learn to address what's unique to an environment. You learn to assess conditions and to eliminate potential concerns. Orientations improve your safety, but they also make your diving more interesting, rewarding, and enjoyable. Every diver has limits. Whether you're new or very experienced, dive within your limits. This means you don't exceed your training and your experience limits. It also means you stay within your comfort limits. This is important because data suggests that failure to dive within personal limits contributes to incidents and accidents. It does this because some forms of diving may have hazards that may not be obvious. It takes training to recognize and avoid them. It can cause false security. Sometimes, if nothing goes wrong, a diver exceeds limits, like entering some wrecks without proper training or gear, and gets away with it. Unfortunately, this encourages doing it again. When a problem arises, though, the diver is completely unprepared to deal with it. Anxiety can cause divers to neglect potential problems. This happens when divers know they've exceeded their limits and focus on that so much it distracts them from other concerns. Expand your limits by continuing your education and gradually gaining experience. Don't let peer pressure influence you to dive beyond your limits or comfort. Suggest a more conservative dive, or dive with another buddy who will dive within your limits. This is not only the better choice for safety, but you'll enjoy yourself more because you can dive with confidence instead of worry. The unique life you see underwater is one of diving's special appeals. It may be your main reason for diving. Most aquatic organisms are fascinating, beautiful, and harmless. As a diver, your interactions can be passive or active. Generally, interact passively, which means leaving aquatic life undisturbed. Swim slowly and smoothly, sensitive to the underwater world around you. The less you disturb, the more you see. Active interactions are those that directly affect aquatic organisms. Some, like touching, moving, or frightening them, are harmful and should be avoided. Some active interactions are reasonable, but more may be harmful, even when that's not what you intend. So keep your interactions passive. Most animals you see are harmless. but a few can injure you. Broadly, we can group these as those that can sting and/or puncture, and those that can bite. Those that can sting or puncture include jellyfish, fire coral and their relatives, spined fish like lionfish and scorpionfish, stingrays, sea urchins, and cone shells. Those that bite include moray eels, sharks, barracuda, octopuses, and lobsters, and crab. Most aquatic life injuries result from a diver being careless and provoking a defense reaction. You can greatly reduce the risk of aquatic life injuries by treating all organisms with respect. Stay well off the bottom, wear an exposure suit and gloves if allowed in the area, and watch where you put your hands and feet. Don't touch aquatic animals, particularly those you don't recognize. If you see a potentially aggressive animal, like a large shark, remain still and calm, on or near the bottom. Don't swim toward it, but keep an eye on it. Chances are it's just passing through. But if it appears aggressive or too curious for your comfort, calmly swim to your exit on the bottom and leave the water. Most aquatic life injuries are mild, but can range from annoying to life-threatening. In all cases, give priority to breathing, providing CPR, and controlling severe bleeding as needed. Provide first aid and seek emergency medical care for clearly serious injuries, severe reactions, or those that don't respond to treatment. You learn more about these types of emergencies in the PADI Rescue Diver and Emergency First Response Primary and Secondary Care courses. When it comes to injuries by aquatic life, you normally think of animals, but kelp and other vegetation can have some hazard potential. The primary one is entanglement, so keep your kit streamlined and stay out of dense growth areas. If you get snagged, back up, but don't turn. That tends to make things worse by wrapping it around you. Get your buddy to help free you if necessary.